Good evening, everyone. Today we will be discussing on the topic expectation gap in auditing, presenting by Nur Nelly Nabiha binti Izanuddin, Nur Shasha binti Sulaiman, Amira Maisarah binti Ahmad Kamal, and Ros Anita binti Ahmad Amin.
I am Amira Maisarah binti Ahmad Kamal. I will begin the presentation with an introduction of expectation gap in auditing. An audit is the examination or review of various books of accounts by an auditor, followed by a physical inventory check to ensure that all departments are adhering to a defined methods of documenting transactions. The objective for an impartial body is to audit and verify the accounts to guarantee that there is no misrepresentation or fraud. The term audit expectation gap was introduced by Lingyo, 1974. He defined it as the discrepancy between users and auditors' perceptions of the degree performance displayed by auditors throughout the course of their job. The audit expectation gap results from a fundamental misunderstanding between what the general public expects from auditing and what a financial audit actually involves. One of the problems with the expectation gap is that it causes undue concern about the auditing process as a whole. Many firms believe that an audit is a hostile examination into their financial records. However, this is not always the duty of an audit, which has its own limitations. As a result, a business owner may be dissatisfied that the audit was not as far-reaching or thorough as intended. Apparently, public misperceptions are a major contributor to the accounting profession's legal liability issue. The objective is to conduct a literature review on the audit expectation gap along the following lines, which are definitions and nature of the expectation gap, impact of the expectation gap, and methods to close the expectation gap.
Hi, my name is Nurnel Nabiha binti Izanuddin, and I will be presenting on explanation and the arguments about the key issue. Let's move to the definition and the nature of expectation gap in auditing. Audit expectation gap arises in a fundamental difference between what the general public expects from auditing and what a financial audit actually involves. This gap is not the result of lack of knowledge, but more from what the public wishes auditor would do. This expectation gap is mainly due to the general public and financial statement user not fully understanding the work performed by the auditors during an audit.
Judges or the public continually expect more from auditors than auditors believe they have delivered as follows as their actual duty and responsibility, and that there is a gap in expectation between auditors and judicial litigants. There is a discrepancy in expectation between auditors and investors regarding the level of certainty offered by an audit. This slide shows the definition of the audit expectation. As for Monroe and Woodleaf, 1993, they define audit expectation gap as the discrepancy between what the public and auditors believe about the roles and responsibility that the auditors assume and the message that audit report convey. While for Vane, Jennings and Recker, 1993, hold the same idea with Liggio, in which they describe the audit expectation gap AEG as the discrepancy between what the general public anticipates from auditors and what auditors actually provide. Porter B. 1993 undisclosed the expectation gap into two components. Following her survey in New Zealand, she renamed the audit expectation gap as the audit expectation performance gap and divided into two, which is reasonable gap and performance gap. Reasonable gap is what society expects the auditors to achieve and what they can reasonably be expected to accomplish, while performance gaps is the gaps between what society can reasonably expect auditors to accomplish and what they are perceived to achieve. Porter B further divide the performance gap into deficient standard, where the gap between what can reasonably be expected of auditors and auditors' existing duty as defined by the law and profession standard. Next is deficient performance, where the difference between the expected standard of performance of auditors' perceived performance as expected and perceived by the public. Let's move to impact of audit expectation gap. The audit expectation gap is inversely correlated with stakeholders' trust in the audit. The audit expectation gap will be reduced and stakeholders' confidence will be increased at the same time if auditors maintain their perceived independence and increase communication with users. Additionally, the Financial Reporting Council active participation serves as a moderator to maintain the appearance of independence among the auditors.
The crisis of trust in auditor independence has highlighted the Big Four accounting firms as worldwide singular dominance. Reliance on the Big Four should be reduced in order to enhance competition in the audit market. Thus, the greater the audit independence, the greater the credibility of the audited financial statements. Hi, I am Ros Anita binti Ahmad Amin, and I am going to explain about types of expectation gap. There are three types of expectation gap, which are knowledge gap, performance gap, and evolution gap.
Knowledge gap exists when public in general is unaware of the auditing process. As a result, their view of what auditors do may differ from what auditors do in actuality. When the public knows how the auditing process works, the knowledge gap may close. The performance gap exists between the gaps in knowledge and the gaps in evolution. In other words, it happens when the public expects the auditor to respond. When what auditors do differs from what auditors are meant to do, a performance gap exists. The evolution gap exists in auditing fields where evolution is required. It considers public demand as well as technical improvements in order to improve the audit process and increase value added. It is essential to discover what needs to change in the audit by addressing the knowledge and performance gap.
Let's move to appropriate analysis and evaluation. Cause of deficient standard gap, which is number 1, fraud. The public has reasonable expectation but exceed what is required of auditors legally and professionally, which is the defective standard gap. The standard might be set too high in the auditor's eyes while being perceived as too low by the general public. The public assume that all financial statements that have undergone an audit are free from fraud, since auditors are trained to spot all forms of fraud. As a result, the audit expectation gap is caused by the divergence between auditors and the public's perspective. Number 2 is going concern. The auditor could cause going concern error with 3 principal reasons. First, because of the auditor's lack of well understanding of their client's firm operations. Next is the economic consideration that have a strong relation between going concern audit reporting and audit quality. Lastly, due to the outcome sometimes being different from what is predicted, even the auditors act independently. Therefore, the auditors must ensure that the data are valuable, comprehensive, accurate, and also trustworthy.
Hi, I am Natasha Binti Sulaiman and I would like to present causes of difference performance gap. First, lack of competence. Auditor education and experience are the two most important factors that can influence auditor competency. Auditors should get a good education before starting their jobs, since this will boost their competency. Auditors may encounter a variety of conditions, complicated dangers, and investigation methods, so they must have strong professional judgment. In general, core audit professionals with sufficient expertise may be more competent to undertake complex audit tasks, potentially lowering performance failure chances. Next, lack of practitioner independence. Although the auditors are already competent and have formally complied with all safeguards and regulations, closing the performance gap will be difficult as long as the problem of practitioners' independence is not adequately addressed. Factors that lead auditors to give unfair audit reports are the threat of self-interest, the auditor maintain a non-audit engagement relationship with the company, and auditors are influenced by client view or threats, making it difficult for them to maintain an unbiased stance. Even though qualified auditors follow the code of ethics and other protections, unintentionally biased judgments are difficult to avoid as long as information might be interpreted differently.
Next is example of cases related to the expectation gap. Enron ranked 7 on the ranking of America's largest and most profitable companies in 2000. It is one of the biggest financial scandals in history. The assets of the US company were estimated to be 63 million with annual turnover of 100 million. However, it declared bankruptcy in December 2001 because everything was made up, liabilities became assets, credits were presented as income, and all profits were overvalued. After it was discovered that the company was altering or making up false accounting records to mislead its shareholders, shares dropped from over USD 90 in 2000 to just USD 1 in 1 year. The similar facts applied for Trong Tan Furniture Corporation, whereby it involved in altering and making up false accounting records. For this case, the share price fell from USD 2 to USD 37 cents.
Next, I will present ways to reduce expectation gap in auditing.
There are 4 ways to reduce the audit expectation gap. First, expansion of auditors' responsibilities. Auditor responsibilities need to be extended, including the duties that are not required of auditors, but which are cost-effective and reasonable for auditors to perform. The majority of the public believes that the auditor is a fraud investigator. It is difficult for the public to let go of their expectations of auditors. To broaden the auditor's responsibilities, for example, government officials must enact legislation allowing the auditors in multiple organizations to record and submit suspicious fraud cases to relevant authorities. As a result, broadening the auditor's responsibilities can aid in closing the expectation gap. Second is strengthen the independence of the external auditor. It is important to emphasize the importance and necessity of sustaining the auditor's independence in the auditor's professional behavior. This is due to the significance of maintaining neutrality while being free from any bias. For instance, the audit committee is in charge of ensuring the auditor's neutrality and independence from management. This is due to their responsibility for choosing and hiring an external auditor, as well as deciding his remuneration and discussing the audit report. As a result, the audit committee can make an informed decision on appointing an external auditor to strengthen the external auditor's independence. Third is expanded the audit report. Wording alteration in audit report can significantly change the user's perception of the nature of an audit. Expanded audit reports have been shown in studies to influence users' perceptions of management and auditor duties. Because expanded audit reports provide a more complete picture of the scope, nature, and significance of the audit. They change the reader's perception of the audit and auditor's duty. As a result, it is more intelligible and beneficial in reducing the audit expectation gap than short-form reports. And the last one, develop more education in auditing. The size of the expectation gap is affected by the user's knowledge. If one has greater audit expertise, he will place less responsibility on auditors and will be less inclined to seek higher auditor assurance. It is necessary to raise public understanding of the nature and limitations of audits in order to boost the sophistication level of user groups. For example, in shareholder meetings, communication on the benefits and limits of an audit should take place to raise user knowledge and awareness. Thus, several researchers discovered that education is one of the most successful approaches to closing the expectation gap.
Lastly, I would like to present conclusion and recommendation. Expectation gap implies that the public expect auditors to perform in ways that auditors themselves would not expect. According to the research, users have higher expectations of audits and auditors than most auditors would deem realistic. There is an increased audit expectation gap, and audit practice present a significant problem. Recurrent audit failure severely damage the reputation of the entire auditing profession. We must take the required steps to control the enlarged audit gap by in-depth study so that the public and audit practitioner or other people involved with the audit profession may understand that to regulate the practice of environmental auditing, practicing audit is everyone's action, not only auditors. Next, recommendation. First, professional bodies could conduct symposia in partnership with auditors to educate audited accounts users on the task and obligation of an auditor, therefore closing the performance gap. Second, an audit firm should not be permitted to provide both audit and non-audit professional service to a customer. This is done to protect the auditor's independence and to avoid conflict of interest that are common when the two professional services are delivered. Third, in the longer term, the regulatory agency with the support of audit firm should promote the launch of a new business reporting model aimed at exposing more non-financial information to the public and defining the role of independent audit clearly. Fourth, users of audited accounts should become acquainted with the rules, statute, and standard that govern and specify the obligation of an auditor in order to understand what to anticipate from the auditors in order to close the performance gap. And lastly, to avoid misinterpretation and misunderstanding of audited account by users, management should endeavour to deliver audited financial statement in a way that users of audited account can easily understand in order to bridge the communication gap that arises.